Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Dr. Deep State. It's titled The Khazarian Mafia versus Saint Maximilian Kolbe. And last time we had an audio issue. Sorry about that, everyone. We talked about a doomsday cult and the deep state. And more of the references went back to a video from 7 years ago. It was a 3-part video that I did here on the channel called The Head of the Snake. And we're going to continue with that concept, but I'm going to sort of assume that people have some of the basics about whether we call it the Lubavitchers or the Doomsday Cult, or in this case, I'm using the term Khazarian Mafia. They're kind of there's a lot of overlap there. They're essentially the same concept, used different ways by different people. So I want to juxtapose that with the great Saint Maximilian Kolbe, and I want to describe where we're at in the world on both ends here with our great saint and with this death cult. So I have no idea why I occasionally had one time the video, the visuals, and one time the audio mysteriously happened and didn't happen. Don't know. In the future, I'll try not to publish anything where that's the case. Hopefully my schedule will allow me to do that, but here we go. So I want to get started with the thumbnail right here, and we'll be going over part of this, but what I'm going to include in this idea of when I say the verses, who the Khazarian Mafia is in the verses, I'm going to, at the risk of being sort of, self-important or judgmental, I'm going to say I really see an event coming in the future. I want to talk about that, this concept of state of exception, and how this group is really trying to channel an event that will bring us into a new mindset. And so I think it's so important for us to prepare ourselves for that. And I think St. Kolbe does that for us. So as I get going here, you're going to notice these are some major thugs that are directly tied to President Trump. And I don't mean in the deep past with all the casinos and Cohen and his lifetime and his intergenerational links to essentially the same mob, but these are current ones that are going on. And before I even get into a description, when we talk about the synagogue versus the church, that's what we're doing here on the channel, getting this theological and typological reality that is part of the construction of Christian civilization and the attack against it, or the enmity against it, which scripture and tradition and typology describe as the synagogue. Sometimes we use the word Zionism, but I really think it's an organized Judeo-Masonic movement that's moving throughout history to destroy the church and create a new order of things. So around this order of things, when people generally talk about the Khazarian Mafia, they mean the strong arm people that do the real nasty work of international drug smuggling, international guns, international sex trafficking. It's this hardcore end of it that are real cozy. There's different documentaries for each one of these characters and their associations and influence upon Trump. So I just want to get going with that mindset. When we think about Trump, what I believe is attached to it, and I think the Mar-a-Lago thing at this point is hard to get around. So I'm going to hit around that. But there is a type of mind. I think this term got overblown. It wasn't around when I mentioned it in this book, but mind virus, everybody's pointing the finger. We'll use the word egregore and some messianic ones. So Trump is closely, the idea of Trump is closely, the messianic sense of Trump is closely aligned to the agenda of the synagogue. I've been arguing that for a long time. And if I dare do this, I'm going to describe a line in the sand that I think needs to be drawn. So that's where I'm generally going with this presentation. And again, the idea, certainly I'm not unique about presenting this. The famous conversation between Rebbe Schneerson and Netanyahu back in the early 90s, do something, do something, do something. This is part of the thinking, the Talmudic, Kabbalistic thinking, that to bring on the next age, they have to enter in to a, what I will describe in political theological terms as a state of exception situation that can bring on the Mashiach, the new order of things. So when we see talk about fermenting anger, war around the world for really no logical reason, the pushing of people into something that appears to be World War III and talking about nuclear devices, this is closely attached to this messianic movement, which is hard to decouple from the messianic sort of linkages there to President Trump. So again, the key point before I make my key points here is the idea that, number one, part of this thing that's being kind of staged, if you like, set up, is a war with Iran. That would be the ultimate triggering. That's what Rebbe Schneerson wanted in 1991 in his conversation there, the public conversation with Netanyahu. And it's this Jewish messianic biblical prophecy that needs to be triggered. And the signature on this as Noahide laws. If you're new to the channel, Noahide laws would be the law of the new order of things. We especially in the book, we went through the entire book now on locals, and we're working through the Metaverse book. But again, the two things that come together, the technological singularity and the Noahide laws, meet together to create the new order of things. It's a surveillance order, the internet of bodies, hyper surveillance, and along with that system is Noahide law, which means a Jewish order of things and servitude for the rest of the world that makes it through the population control mechanisms of this really pinnacle eugenics movement. It's really the pinnacle of the eugenics movement. Okay, so that's much of the stuff we have been talking about in this presentation. I think it's just hard to get around before I say 1, 2, 3, what I'm up to. This is a Noahide movement. So all of the characters really on the world stage, the statesmen of the world stage, the legislatures of the world stage, regardless of parties, are moving the world into Noahide-ism. And that means a crushing of our concept, our theological concepts embedded in Christian civilization, embedded in sacred scripture. They're increasingly going to become outlawed. We'll show you that again. And then the rise of this new legal system. And just by the way, when Trump is proposing recently to kind of get rid of the United Nations, it's to bring about these new international courts of justice that are connected to that. And again, this is part of it's a part of a move to make the world what they would describe as kosher, make the pigs kosher. You can be Christian as long as you lose all the essential features of Christianity and enter into servitude in this new, some of this stuff seems so like, I've never heard this before. It can't be true. There are a number of researchers that have been doing this for many years, and the information and the direction of events in the world continues to validate this. And again, I'll say this over and over. We have all the memory hold material that validates this material about the agenda in place and the plans for the church and the direction of things to come. So what we're doing here today is we are going to argue that I'm going to keep this on small. I'm not going to mess around with the screen size. So hopefully that's large enough so we can see it. But I'm going to argue that we must choose between the Khazarian Mafia, and that includes the Mar-a-Lago set, and the people that are kind of sucked into this overarching messianic energy, including Trump and his getaway there at Mar-a-Lago, versus St. Maximilian Kolbe. So in order to try to keep this kind of simple, I did two pictures because even if we get into, I'm going to try not to do too much philosophy, but there is some in here. So before we get lost in the sauce, we can just, two characters there. We got the saint and we got Rabbi Schneerson. And just before I go, when we talk about, we're going to show again, you've seen him before, pictures of Trump and Schneerson and praying at his grave and so forth. Bear in mind that the tie here, when I say Noahidism, it goes back to the 13th century with the innovation of Maimonides, the figure of Maimonides, and the innovation of the Zohar and the Kabbalah. That creates this entire, it's an system that's not only antithetical to Christianity, but it's a precise inversion of it. And again, that's the covert nature of the doctrine and the means of warfare. And so Maimonides is kind of the granddaddy of the Noahide concept, the Ben Shapiro, and all the other really talking heads that push this strain of Zionism are attached to. So before I began, I was just going to pop this up. When I talk over here, again, links will be in the description for our locals community. We have 3, oftentimes 4 videos a week where we go in depth in all this kind of material and so much other stuff that's difficult to talk about here. But again, we have a Christian singularity. It's telos. Its end is, heaven. It's the new heaven, new earth. It's the beatific vision. The inversion of that, it's the subtitle here, In Pursuit of the Metaverse. It's millennial dreams. It's taking those transcendental ideas that we're connected to, putting them down here on earth for a worldly goal, worldly project, a worldly vision, and getting everybody attached to that vision. We say through Kabbalah or biopolitics. We may touch on that again, but we've been discussing that quite a bit. So the overarching direction of things, the animating feature, the telos of this is millennial dreams, political religion, and we can only touch on a couple of those characters today. We're going in depth over the next year, piece by piece, to develop this political religion, which is embedded in most of our modern political institutions. And finally, the move is techno-utopia. So the two things come together, the singularity and the Noahide laws, and that's the direction of things. And Schneerson is the sort of forerunner of the ultimate Mashiach. And when I say the Khazarian Mafia, this is the tip of the spear in the sense that it's the muscle behind the synagogue, behind Zionism, that gets the work done, bends the elbows, whether it's through carrot or stick, coercion or reward. It moves the actors on the world stage and the rest of our consciousness in this direction of Noahide. So I'm going to describe the two positions. I'm going to describe a little bit the state of exception, in regard to this agenda of the Schneerson Noahide agenda. I'm going to describe a little bit about the egregore, and I'm going to have some help outside of my books. Somebody wrote an article this week, and I think there's a couple of points worth mentioning. A little bit how the egregore fits into the mark of the beast. Of course, this is part of the direction of things. And I'm going to suggest the what to do question about all of this as Christians, especially Catholics, faithful Catholics. I think that Saint Maximilian Kolbe has something to say. Now, I am working, I'll just say it, I have 6 articles now working toward a book, which is called The Saints of the Apocalypse. So I'm putting a continuation from Saint Stephen, who opened the beatific vision, the great martyr, all the way to the great martyr of Kolbe. So we got, I believe they're speaking to our time, and these saints have a direction. They have a way they want us to go. I'm going to get into pictures in our head. We need to fill ourselves with the spiritual kingdom. And I believe the messages that these saints are telling us, whether it's Saint Stephen, Saint John Chrysostom, Saint Augustine, Saint Thomas Aquinas, or Saint Maximilian Kolbe, there's one consistent theme, but I think that Saint Kolbe really speaks to our time. I believe the state of exception that is upon us was the same state of exception with the same actors when he met his death during World War II. So a little bit, just quickly, I'm going to assume a lot of people have heard about St. Maximilian Kolbe. He is considered a saint of the church. He died in a concentration camp during World War II. And just to give you a feel of what he was up to in the 20th century, we've talked, and we have so much online on our locals community. We collect all these memory hold materials, but there's so much great stuff starting between 1890, but in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, just endless material with the exact same cosmic conspiracy against God and man, against Christ and his church, that St. Maximilian Kolbe is pointing out right here. So in one of his articles called The Poor Ones, he's describing a hatred against Christ and his church. So it's the cosmic conspiracy. We really have to understand the Talmud. We can't break that apart. But before you wake up to this, anybody that truly wakes up, you have to understand that rabbinical Judaism that is around us today is a product of the commentary on the Torah, which is innovated or written down in the probably the first 500 years of after the death of Christ. And it is a commentary. It's a human commentary on divine revelation. And it's what also gave birth to the Kabbalah, which is the dialectic that is moving events forward in the world. And if this is new to you, it's okay. I'm not going to get too crazy into that stuff. But he's recognizing the essential typologies that we talk about here, all the way from Cain and Abel. Cain came from above, Abel from below. Jacob and Esau, Jacob was from above, Esau is from below. Christ and the Pharisees, Christ is from above. And as he said, you Pharisees are from below. And as scripture and tradition tells us, particularly the tradition of the great saints of the church, that typology now is the church and the synagogue. A Jewish encyclopedia defines modern Judaism as a Phariseeism. In fact, we did an article over on Locals this week from a book called Facts Are Facts, 1954, written by a convert named Friedman. And he talks about throughout history, the word Jewish was almost created. It doesn't even exist in the King James Bible. It was understood as Phariseeism or Talmudism generally. That's how it was understood. So there's a modern conflation when you hear terms like Christ was a Jew or Blessed Mother was a Jew. It's this it's to get you into this egregore, this modern, and that's what's going to happen. We're going to have to be, it's going to have to be put into sync when we get into this state of exception, this idea of there's a Judeo-Christian faith that we have to ascribe to if you're going to go into make the initiation into the Luciferian age. But in fact, they're two oxymorons. Christ said, if you do not have the Son, you do not have the Father. Our God is a Trinitarian God. This is a God, I don't want to get into all the details, a God that exists that has no essence. So it's a long story about how this dialectic does, but the Khazarian Mafia, the synagogue, the Lubavitchers, they worship a God where essentially they become their own gods. They worship a force in history, that a force that's both good and evil. So they adopt both and they control the resources and that's the ultimate metaphysical leverage, is they're moving across the world in good and evil. Sometimes it appears as the Democratic Party and the Republican, Labor and Tory, both owned and controlled by the same movement. And that's the thing we hear about the dialectics so often. Some people say good cop, bad cop. And so he's calling it out. He's got the J word right there. So he called it out. That's all I'm doing on this channel. I'm not creating any information. I'm just standing up for this cosmic conspiracy, this truth that's always been there, in order to defend the church. But along with what St. Kolbe's going to say here, there's one more important variable that I think is part of this program. So for St. Maximilian, he wanted people to become part of a society that he created, and we'll talk about that a little bit. but he wanted to literally convert heretics, Freemasons, but especially Jews. And he didn't cower in fear of saying that or just say stonecutters and leave it at that. He realized, like everybody else, that doesn't do anything to defend or advance the agenda. You have to name the Talmud, name the Kabbalah and the agenda, name them. And so, like we're going to mention here over and over again, just to remind ourselves, if you don't get the agenda, none of this will make sense. The agenda of the enmity, the enemies of the church, the agenda is to destroy Christianity and create a new messianic order, i.e. Antichrist. So if you're not, that this has been happening since the garden, since the 1st century, but especially since the 13th century, when the Kabbalah and the Zohar were in place. It's been working throughout, and we'll say quotes of all the great revolutions of the world. So he is calling it out in no uncertain terms. And I think the story that commonly gets, he was in Rome and he saw Masons walking down the street. We're going to destroy the church. That's our goal, and set up a new kingdom. And he's going, oh, well, we should try to actually defend ourselves from this. So that's kind of the birthing of this story, where he creates the society. So who can overthrow the secret army? Asks Father Kolbe, again citing, and I'm going to mention this here. He cites this. This was very common in all the memory hold books, whether they're people from the royal family, statesmen, journalists, academics. When they cite this in the 1920s, 1930s, it was very common to cite this source right here of the protocols. Now, we'll get into this. A lot of people are going to criticize St. Kolbe for citing this. The point is that agenda is the same as all of the other agendas, whether it's the Illuminati agenda, the Zionist agenda, the communist. It's one agenda. It's one cosmic conspiracy. I just described what it was. So he's citing here in the case the protocols. And it says, they say of themselves, who or what is in a position to overthrow an invisible force. And this is precisely what our force is. Gentile Freemasonry only serves as a screen for us and our objectives, but our plan of action will always remain unknown to people. So it's invisible. It's memory hold material. Generally, to talk about it, you have to go behind some kind of a paywall. When you do what I'm doing right now on YouTube, you're taking a major risk of losing everything just by speaking about it. Just overnight, everything can be zapped if you go too far. So I'm going to suggest that this is the best. When people want to know what to do, I'm going to suggest this. This is our best defense. And St. Kolbe would say, no one in the world can change truth. What we can do and what we should do is seek truth and serve it when we have found it. That's my motto here. That's what I'm doing. A lot of times I make reference to 2 Thessalonians 2:10 about the great deception. God let them, the world, the majority of people, when I say the majority, virtually everybody fell prey to this deception because they did not love the truth. In most commentaries, the fullness of the truth. They could talk about stonecutters. They could talk about communism, but the inconvenient parts, the difficult parts, society is okay, you moving along, so they were. God was not happy with that. That's the point, I believe, is punctuated here by saying it's the love of the fullness of the truth as it's been revealed through scripture and tradition. Everything we're talking about with the Khazarian Mafia, with the Lubavitchers, with the death cult, the doomsday cult, it's all consistent with scripture and tradition, and indeed with Catholic prophecy. So here is the medal, and I happen to be wearing one. And yes, in a big way, I don't feel worthy. I carved out 25 additional days during Lent where I'm doing, it's a private thing, but I'm doing something in my own world that we have some freedom. This is an organization that can exist over time, in addition to other organizations, Christian organizations, and there's some personal room with the sacrifices you want to get for initiation. So I'm going through mine right now. I'm proudly wearing the medal as we speak. So I feel that in this battle, during the election year, people would always say, well, what do you want us to do if we're not supposed to engage and give our consent over to this system? And now we're in a point where people are still going, what do you want to do? Well, there's 2 points I constantly make. Understand the enmity and the agenda of the enmity and who's attached to it. And once you understand that thoroughly, and when you're ready for action, do that first. Then decide what wall you're leaning your ladder against. But we really have to get straight in our minds first who the enemy is, what's the battlefield, and where are things going, so that we're not in a state of deception. So the commander ultimately of this force that's going to fight this invisible force in the world needs a commander. And the commander is our Blessed Mother. And again, St. Kolbe is going to begin. He's going to begin this quest, just as I have throughout my works, with the initial prophecy of Scripture, which is the curse put upon the enmity put upon the seed of the woman, our Blessed Mother, and the seed of the serpent, and she will crush his head. So who else do we want to get behind? So she is the force behind our militia. So, quick takeaway. The Jason's goal is to destroy the church and prepare the world for CHRIST. So what do we need to do? Identify, follow in the steps of Jesus Christ, Saint Maximilian Kolbe, John Chrysostom, Saint Augustine, Saint Thomas, Saint Kolbe. We have a tradition, and all of this is based upon sacred scripture. So identify it, understand their agenda. And here's the key point for today. It's not enough to understand it and simply defend the church. If we really are ready to embrace the spirit of St. Maximilian Kolbe, we have to work in order to achieve their conversion. So it's not just enough to lay back and just pray. That's what his greatest wish is, to convert Freemasons. And it seems like we're doing the impossible, but with God on our side and the Blessed Mother is our commander, we must believe that all things are possible. We can't stay in a defensive position. We must be offensive and work toward the conversion of the Jews. Why? Because we love them. We care about their eternal soul. To say that they have some kind of separate arrangement is to damn them to hell, and that is not loving them. So with our Blessed Mother on our side, who could be against us? So a quick little take on St. Maximilian. So I am writing the article right now, and what I find is a lot of modern content. So I'm being simplistic here, but of the commentary on St. Kolbe. Generally, the people in the synagogue, those writers which tend to control Wikipedia and give all the opinions on Catholic information and so forth, the same people that are trying to gut sacred scripture, the same people that are calling for all kinds of anti-Semitic legislation, those people, if you're asked, was he, St. Kolbe, an anti-Semite? Unequivocally, yes, from the synagogue, from those writers that are trying to crush this church. From Christian writers, and it tends to be Catholic writers because he's a saint of the church, there's a very squishy, don't want to let him go, but it's like, well, he cited the protocols and he didn't know better. And it's a little bit embarrassing, but he did so much good stuff. Let's just pretend it doesn't work. That's not satisfying for me, and I hope it's not for you. That document is corroborated with all the other documents that we talk about and will continue to talk about today. So the protocols is describing the exact same cosmic conspiracy against God and man, Christ and the church. So it's the exact same thing. So saying he happened to cite that, he was full on board. He was fully aware of Father Fahey. He was fully aware of the other documents we're talking about, like Christian Civilization, 1890, the Jesuit document, all the same documents, all saying the same thing. So it's just this fear of talking about this subject. So that's just generally the Catholics that defend it don't want to talk about this part of who he was and what his mission was. And it's so central to what he wanted to leave us. He's speaking to us today. And I believe he wants us to give our minds and hearts over to his project. So I'm only going to tap on the Khazarians now because I'm going to show you all kinds of photographs. And I'm assuming you have some idea of this group and the agenda. But just quickly stated, it's part of the same dynastic families with the ancient trading companies and cartels. Again, Christian Civilization article is going to say first by 1890, they controlled the resources of the world. Then they were conquering all the academic institutions, all the research institutions, all the publishing institutions to control the body, minds, and spirits and the development of Christian civilization in order ultimately to make the pig kosher, make Christians kosher for the new age. So behind the revolutions, behind the United Nations, essentially it was the characters there with this current world order. And I believe that was some of the objectives: create the state of Israel, create the United Nations, create the general agreement on tariffs and trade. We call it the World Trade Organization now, create the International Monetary Fund, create the World Bank, all in their control. I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. Just like right now, it's this information's being externalized. You know, in the past, there might be faces behind what we used to call the robber barons, DuPont, Morgan, Pullman, Vanderbilt, those names. Once their estates were sliced up, they realized it was actually the controlling elements were back in the city of London with the dynasty. So today, there's no hiding behind anybody. If we look who the controlling interests are behind BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, etc., it'll be like 8 out of 8 names are part of, they're down with the agenda. They're part of the group. So again, I know I've repeated this a bunch of times, but this is the cosmic conspiracy. This is where the world's going. This is where it started again. Whew, I didn't know if I'd have to start over. So again, this is Christian civilization right here. In addition, this same agenda is throughout the document, but even the document even begins by talking about the secrets of the Talmud, which St. Kolbe's talking about regarding the extermination, the church, Christians, and that's the agenda in order to build a new order. It's repeated over and over and over again. Before I even read this one, I could make reference to this entire book describing the same actors, the same agenda. So excellent book, great reference book. So again, we've had this one on here many times, but the agenda in order to bring on, this is, the conversation with Rabbi Schneerson and Netanyahu to bring on the Mashiach, Um, we're to liberate and bring back people to the nation state over there. It was created in 1948. Then all the people in the world will be subjected to the Jays. So that's the world. That's Noahide. That they are going to enslave everybody that it's not them. And if if you're hearing this for the first time, I'm sure most of you aren't. Over and over and over again, this is the agenda. So none of this is going to make sense, unless we're clear of where they are taking the direction of events in the world. So they will treat people as property and use them at their own discretion, and ultimately slaughter and completely exterminate anybody that isn't made kosher, a slave. And people think, well, this is so far-fetched. I can maybe imagine this centuries from now. And I ain't blackpilling anybody here, but when a triggering event happens, perhaps in your own life, perhaps in the near future, if you're not clear about what the agenda is and what's going, because they use terms like Judeo-Christian and this and that to move you along into a new ecumenical order. And again, that's the last chapter of this book that we're just beginning over there in Locals. When Christ becomes hate speech, the process is we acquiesce. Well, I don't want to be politically incorrect, so I'll give a little bit. It's not too long down the road before you're worshiping a different God. You're in a different religion. And so that's what they're preparing the world for. But it can't be more explicit. This isn't a one-off. I can find I have on Locals, document after document. This is the agenda. And again, I will be saying this. Where's the pushback? Where's the pushback? So just some of these I had last time. I could come up with many others from their own mouths, the people that are part of the Khazarian Mafia. We're behind, it's worse than you think. When people say this expression, when they're uncomfortable, they don't want to go here. So, it's all that. And they just dismiss it. And the point I made in the last video, or 7 years ago, well, in social science, we'd say, okay, let's look at the influence. Let's weigh out all the facts. Is it 20%? What's the likelihood that this is has significant influence over world politics? Is it 20%? Is it 50%? Is it 70%? I assumed it is statistically very significant. So this person is saying, it's worse than you think. If you're just getting your head around this now, it's so much worse than you think. We're behind all the revolutions. We're behind creating all the confusion. We're doing it. Or we could talk about Maurice Strong, that is saying this just a few years earlier. You Gentiles, we're here to destroy you. That's what we do. And again, the historical mission of our world revolution sounds like what E. Michael Jones talks about is the arrangement of a new culture, humanity, to replace the previous social system. Christ versus Antichrist, the Khazarian Mafia versus St. Kolbe. Requires two essential steps. First, the destruction of the old system. Secondly, the design and imposition of the new. So what I'm arguing here today is there's going to be an event to create this thing called the state of exception. And historically, this happens, that you can create an event and inject a new agenda. And I believe that is what the Khazarian Mafia is building up right now in the world. This punctuated event that we've experienced in our own lifetimes, one 25 years ago and one 5 years ago, where there's a new normal and this kind of thing. So that's what's going on. That's the agenda. They're admitting they're the force behind the revolutions. And the first stage requires the elimination of frontiers, borders, nationalhood, culture. So when you think about immigration, et cetera, which shoved down everybody's throat in the schools, media, that's part of this agenda of making the pig kosher in preparation for the Mashiach. The first task of our world revolution is destruction. And that is apparently when you really, once you get past what Trump is doing with the trade laws and setting the world up in this precarious position, he's setting it up, I'm sorry for that, for a fall. Now, what I know is when this stuff goes down, I know 2 years from now, people that are still down with Trump are not going to say, oh, you were right. I've never heard that. I've been saying this now on the channel. It's going to be 8 years in a couple months. I've never heard anybody say, dang, you were right all along. Well, some people that joined do. Okay, now I find. But for the most part, if you're not clear in your consciousness and you're just kind of in between worlds, this system, when these events happen, there's something called mimetic energy. That's the energy that keeps people in sync with society and going with the flow. It'll be, you saw it, how many people got subjected to the agenda 5 years ago. Think about 25 years ago, how many people got into that flow, the message pushed by the media and the institutions of the world, and just wanted to get everybody. So you have to be in almost understand the agenda, get your mind and spirit in a very uncompromising position. So if this comes, this information will be much more valuable than any sort of, what do they call it? Escape bag you can prepare for yourself to really understand this, kind of imagine even what the agenda could look like. So at that time, you're on solid ground. You're not going to be shifted in your thinking. So, and again, Marx is writing the same thing: world, dominion, abolish frontiers, exact same words. All of the money and power, the BlackRocks, the State Streets, the Vanguards are going to fall, and they can't hide behind names like Rockefeller or something that even sounds vague. It has to be straight up. The names have to be there, and that's part of the externalization. All the decision-making power in America, foreign policy and domestic, not only do you know those names, but they're dual citizens. So that's part of what they're doing. You are already told, it's been externalized, that the people making decisions are making it for this agenda. And I hate to have to tell you people, again, most of the people are watching, I don't, but politicians lie. Oh, when somebody lies and lies and lies and you're coming back for the more, there's a point where something has to happen. You have to grab yourself and say, wait a minute. These are a lot of lies. These are a lot of major lies. Do I want to continue following this path of people that are continually lying to me? So this is what the policies in the world, and I don't know how we want to call it, the industrial world, the Western world, the policies of statesmen are really moving up for this, the abolition of property. What does that sound like? Well, it's a type of communism. This new system has actually, I've argued in Singularity, it's taking elements of fascism and communism into this new world order. But the abolition of public property is of course, that's Marxism. He's writing it, right? So it's part of his agenda. I did an article, I did a Locals episode this week, and I argued, to the best of the evidence I can get, I do believe he worked for the Rothschilds and he was a hardcore Kabbalist. And this is kind of the biopolitics. This is the agenda put into the modern institutions. And that's what we were talking about on Locals this week in one of our episodes. And right again, you can see that the mimetic energy over there, 99% of people are down with a complete, and the world looks on like nothing's going on. Like there's no sense of right or wrong. How else can you describe this behind some kind of demonic ontology, behind whether you call it the spectacle, placing us in this mind prison, the egregore? In any other country, in any other time, this would be unacceptable. And this is happening right now in real time. And instead, we're cheering them on. Both our political parties in pretty much all the countries. And people are kind of scared. Well, what am I going to cheer for? I'm just giving you the best suggestion I can come up with. And so again, this are the thinking. This guy right here, straight up Khazarian Mafia figure, leader. The Goyim were born to serve us. Without that, they have no place in the world, only to serve. Here you got it, right? That's what they think of you. You have no soul. And I think most of you have heard this kind of information. I'm just reminding us. Okay, I'm just reminding us here what we're dealing with. So again, there's our juxtaposition. The mob, and it was the same actors, the same genealogy that he took on. And he took it on as Saint Stephen in the spirit of martyrdom, but also in the spirit of church militant simultaneously. That's what opened up the beatific vision with Saint Stephen. And that same mission, that same church militancy, coupled with the spirit of martyrdom, will defend the church and even convert others. And again, there is some time when people talk about black pill, and if you learn too much, you're going to be you can fall into despair and not do anything. Quite the contrary. You find it out, and then you become part of the church militia. You prepare for battle. Now, we had another episode on locals last week, and again this week talking about pictures in our heads. So when I make this line in the sand, I would like to think a lot of, and look, I don't want to be a jerk here, but I'm interested in preserving reality, which I have defined as a vantage point upon reality is uniquely the Roman Catholic Church, which is historical, hierarchical, and sacramental. Sacramental is the way we bring our world, our sacraments into the world. And if the influencers are going to be down with Mar-a-Lago, kicking it up, being fine, looking at little parts of what they like about an agenda and continuing to ignore the death and mayhem of destruction of what's going on in the church, calling themselves traditional Catholics defending the faith. I'm just one small voice over here saying, I don't think it's going to cut it. I humbly submit that to you. And instead, I say that we need to defend the church, convert the enemies of the church, and nothing less. So the pictures we get in our heads, the media we watch, the people we listen to, Mar-a-Lago, I think, came up a week ago. And I think it was a tipping point for many influencers, at least in our world here on Dr. Deep State Locals. We were all in complete agreement, the entire community, that something significantly happened there with the Catholics for Catholics and the priests kicking it up down there. It drew me to draw for us a line in the sand. And I think it really comes about being clear in our mind. And again, famously, Walter Lippmann, who I cite so much, said about these pictures, we are all captives to the pictures in our heads, our belief that the world we have experienced as the experience. So the end point of people like Bernays and Lippmann in this sense is that the controllers, the mafia, the Khazarian Mafia, the synagogue, as Bernays famously said, we're the secret controllers. We put the images in your head. Let's go on a little bit further here. So even more monopoly control today. The synagogue owns and controls the images put out there, Netflix, the television, and platforms like this that censor alternative information. And so that is part of achieving that agenda. Manufacture an event, put it to our controlled Mockingbird MK Ultra media, in order to put a trance on the population. And I have argued over and over in this ontological war of reality, if we can't wake up to the agenda, if we can't wake up to the enmity and how the enemy operates, they manufacture events, they feed it to the controlled media to give you a false version in order to push you into their new ecumenical religion that they're creating. So that's how they're moving it forward. This is called the left-right dialectic. People that can't call out the left-right dialectic, I have argued, are keeping us in the spectacle, in this demonic ontology, in the worldly memetics. We have to get the thoughts in our heads into the transcendent. So it transcends all of the worldly spectacle that's pulling us down. And so that's part of this agenda that we'll talk about, is to move those transcendent images in our head and somehow misplace those categories and put them into earthly categories. Take our category of heavenly Jerusalem and get our bodies, minds, and spirits cooperating with the agenda for earthly Jerusalem that's being created very rapidly. So this is the part of the presentation where things get a little bit heavy. If I feel like I'm not connecting, I'll move on a little bit. But so this is from an article a few weeks back, and it was from in yellow, a statement made by President Donald Trump to Senator Chuck Schumer. He's not Jewish anymore. He's a Palestinian. With these words, U.S. President Donald Trump did not merely insult Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer. He exposed something far more insidious. Trump's world, Palestine, is not just a nationality. It's a question of a mark of delegitimization. Schumer's crime was questioning Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's increasing authoritarian government. Schumer, a staunch Zionist, think about that. This Zionist is more critical of the death and mayhem than most Catholic influencers. This staunch member of the synagogue, Zionist, is actually giving more pushback to the agenda than most of our influencers. Schumer, a staunch Zionist who has long positioned himself as one of Israel's most unwavering defenders, dared to suggest that Netanyahu's extremism was harming Israel's future. That alone was enough for Trump to strip him of his Jewishness and brand him as something else, something meant to be demeaning. So I'm going to bring up terms like state of exception, and that's a movement of events in the world where you go from one kind of order to another. It's famous when we talk about international politics. We usually have a dominant hegemonic power in the world who makes and enforces the rules of the international community. There's usually a transition of powers from Spain to Holland, from Holland to UK, from England to the United States. Those are the most kind of obvious state of exception moments where politics as usual is transformed. There's a new normal and then a new transition into a new order of things. So in that process, a philosopher that I work from in both of my books is the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben. And he has a term, and I don't want to get too, he is heavy. So I want to be careful how I'm using this. I'm going to talk about the Nazi jurist Carl Schmitt, very important concepts for what's about to come, and the connection with him and Giorgio Agamben. So Giorgio Agamben has this term called bare life. He thinks the logic of the world is moving toward a camp. That's when you have your sort of regular rights, your what we could regularly call your national rights or some vague notion of human rights. Your sort of notion of human dignity is being stripped of you. And so that suggestion there by Trump, where he kind of delegitimizes Schumer, is a type of stripping down to bare life. He took his the essentials, the key word, his essential identity, his humanness, especially the humanness that we Christians value, as being made in the image of God, Imago Dei, to strip that. So this transition into the Noahide world, part of that will be what Agamben would call the camp. And that's being stripped of that essential, because in the book of the Apocalypse, I have argued, I believe that's what's transpiring, is there's a selling of the image of God. It's sold for the image of man in real, sort of basic analysis. So again, just a reminder of the thug life around Trump. You have to go into especially a couple of these characters over here, just the extent of influence and the background of all of these people. Look at the guy over here on the far, if you're facing the camera, far right. There's a couple great documentaries about him. Again, the extent of influence, what they're involved in. And it's just that the muscle, the beyond good and evil, Machiavellian, means to an end to get the job done. They will do anything it takes, manufacture any event, blame anybody. And yes. So these are the kind of people with the mafia. It's those kind of ideas. That's the kind of the Lubavitcher kind of idea. And they're the tip of the spear of the synagogue. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of exception, and I hope this goes well. Let's read a little bit first. Giorgio Agamben's book. First of all, I want to start out. This is the beginning, I believe, of chapter 4 in Pursuit of the Metaverse. Of course, links will be in the description section. And Carl Schmitt was essentially the jurist, the philosopher, the legalist that kind of carved out the legal international position of the Nazi movement. And he was a well-trained Catholic and brilliant intellectual. And one of his insights here that I began the chapter with, all significant concepts of modern theory of the state are secularized theological concepts. When I talked about what the goal here is, they want to take our transcendent categories of thought, like the kingdom of heaven, and they want us to put it down into an earthly pursuit, into an earthly project. So a great example of that are evangelical Christian Zionists. They don't believe the Christian of heaven. They don't believe the Catholic worldview that we're living right now. The present age is the kingdom of heaven. They put it into the future. They put it into the third temple. So that's kind of the idea. So all modern concepts, he's arguing here, that we use are borrowed from metaphysical religious concepts. That's how people are able to, in a sense, grab our energy. I would say, like, Shanghai us, hoodwink us. They're grabbing us because if we're not firmly embraced in the theology and the history and the tradition of our concepts, we can have them shifted over, and so that they become worldly concepts or political concepts. So one of the ways I frame this is political religion. Carl Schmitt speaks much about political religion. So we're moving from our millennial dreams into an embedded, it's part of our modern political institutions, liberalism, communism. They're political religions aimed at moving the world toward the new age, or I called it techno-utopia, the metaverse. Sometimes I use the word pure simulacrum, where the whole economy of language and signs and symbols no longer points, as it did in Christendom, as it did in our liturgy. All the signs and symbols point to the salvation of all things, into a new heaven and a new earth. So I hope I'm not losing anybody. So Giorgio Agamben's books, The State of Exception, argues that democracies inherently undermine themselves, leading to the necessity of dictatorship in modern politics. In other words, when we see moves like all of Trump's executive orders are unprecedented and bold, and then there's these statements. I like Prince Charles, and I think monarchy. It seems to be upon us right now that there's a new movement toward, some people call it communism, some people call it fascism, but it's a new type of dictatorial order. And it's going on as people are kind of exhausted by politics as usual, the creation of wokeism for this purpose. So the logic that's embedded, so for Agamben, in the seeds of modern democracy is this totalitarian vein that will blossom in dictatorship. The power of sovereign to declare a state of emergency and suspend normal legal procedures create a state of exception in which the entire world can be subjected to conditions reminiscent of the camp. So I could go on and on and on and on. This is what I believe the Khazarian Mafia and the statesmen of the world are trying to create, this condition to set up a state of exception. And again, I can go on major events when hegemonic powers, maybe it's great sea battles between Spain and Holland, Spain and England, that would set the stage. I go into a thing called, that I've mentioned before, an esoteric concept called the killing of the king. And I investigated in this book, both in the case of England and in Portugal, where the execution created a usurpation, a vacuum of power, where the oligarchs interjected a new legal system, a new way of thinking, a new way of being. So sometimes when we're not concrete with those thoughts, that they're transcendent in nature, during those times of exception, when there's chaos and people are looking for answers, that's when people are shifted into a new paradigm. So it's built into modern politics. And that's what happens. The state of emergency, we saw it 5 years ago. In America, we literally saw it. There was a continuation. It's very subtle the way it was done. There was a continuation of government. That's what you call the deep state, essentially took power. It happened on a public stage with Trump, if you've never heard about that event. I believe that, it's been going on for a long time. I believe it was going on the entire administration with the last, whatever they call them, creepy or sleepy or whatever they call them over there. So it got in play. So I hope you're getting some idea. It's these dramatic events, and they're going to tell us that the regular rules of governance, the regular rules of rights have been suspended. And like if a nation goes into what we call martial law that's triggered by crisis, I live here in Texas, even the governor under conditions of crisis can call out the state guard. And so it's built into systems that a new sort of dictatorial regime can rise to power. This will be the necessary precedent to bring about Noahide laws. So the state of exception, again, the metaphysics of this. In this sense, Carl Schmitt's assertion that all significant concepts of the modern theory of the state are secularized theological concepts underscores the enduring reality of transcendence upon political thought. We are wired for God. Whether or not we want to acknowledge that and serve God is another point. But according to Schmitt, even in a secular context, the political concepts and ideas require theological foundation. Schmitt's statement suggests that the figure of the sovereign as the symbol of political power maintains a connection between politics and religion. So the important thing here is right now, the world is kind of through media and the culture. If you've ever heard of Albert Pike's 3 separate events, first we're going to kind of push nihilism and atheism and agnosticism, and then through a critical event, kind of where the Islamics and the Christians, we're going to have them go at it. Islam's going to be our broom to help us clean up. And through that event, then we're going to bring in a new, I would say, Luciferian ecumenical order that the church is preparing for right now. Protestants are pretty much ready and locked and loaded to go. So that's when the shift happens, during these transitional events, when politics as usual. And then because of crisis, that's when you need a strongman, a dictatorial power come and rise up. So I'm going to argue that the state of exception in this situation, an egregore, a new thought form, a new paradigm of thinking is created. And we heard that 21 years ago. Things will never be the same. We have to think about security in a new way so that we can go attack new countries, and you can lose we're going to lose so many of your rights with the Patriot Act here, over here, what happened 5 years ago. Before I continue, I might want to read just briefly from the Metaverse. It's very dark in here, and I might not get too far, but I did want to mention a little bit about Schmidt. Well, here's a reference. Schmidt's perspective on political theories revolves around the notion of man being deprived of God, of a desire for God. So a larger concept of when we no longer have our faith and are completely attached to God. So much of this is about the creation of idols. Now, what we've gone into heavily, an egregore, the spectacle, a love of this world, they're all idols. Most of this that we're arguing over on Locals comes back to obedience to the first commandment. If you've ever seen the beginning of Romans, we knew God through his creation. We knew God. We were connected to his being. But in becoming wise, political, worldly, we became fools, and instead of worshiping the creator, we began worshiping creatures, creepy crawly things, slithering things. We began following the serpent. And that's the serpent that's building this new world order, the serpent that builds the order, the becoming through the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree that ultimately, for our apotheosis, us to become completely gods in our own world, the apotheosis, the last nut will require singularity, technology, technologically mediated ascension to bring into this. So we inherently do have that connection of God. When we lose that connection, we fall prey to the powers of this world that will steer and guide us into their agenda. In Schmidt's political theology, again, I'm reading up here. In Schmidt's political theology, the transcendent that is traditionally associated with the divine or higher metaphysical order is collapsed into the immanent realm of politics. I'm going to say that again. I'm going to get this off just so you can really concentrate. This could be Marxism. This could be fascism. So in his theology, the transcendent that we're wired for, that our deepest desires are to be wired to this fullness of reality, that is traditionally associated with the divine or higher metaphysical order is collapsed into the eminent realm of politics. This means that the transcendent aspects of political power are denied or negated, and the political authority is seen as purely eminent or self-contained. So communism, it follows a Machiavellian program. There is no transcendent realm. There are no virtues. There are no universal forms. It's nominalism. It's naturalism. It's the eminent realm alone. So all those leftover ideas are going to be used by the powers that be and channeled like a battery into the project of the building of the kingdom of man. So in communism, for example, it's ripe for creating egregores because those pictures are no longer going to the transcendent. In communism, according to Marx, you only have your economic base and the superstructure. The base controls the media. They put the pictures in your head. They can control the whole visual economy. It's a simulacrum. They've taken you away from signs and symbols, can bring you back to the church, can bring you back to God, can bring you back to the sacraments. Those are eliminated. And that was the case of communism. And fascism, as we famously know it, also usurped a lot of those signs and symbols and put it into earthly politics. And indeed, Schmidt was one of the people that helped do that. So he's calling out essentially how he went about figuring out. You can either say God is dead and make an order that way, or you can take those concepts and you can really use the charge and put it into a worldly pursuit. So I have that. And I think I have just a tiny bit more. The Great Reset and the Hidden Paradigm. I don't know why I'm putting that up. You can't really see it. So this is a little bit more from Giorgio Gammon. I think he's one of my favorites. He's still alive. He even in here comments a little bit on the camp and how we saw that going on during COVID. He's brilliant. I think he speaks like 10 languages, really, really classic type of old scholar. So he offers a critical analysis of modern democracies and its relationship to totalitarianism, because that's what the world's being set up for. All these events, all the actors are being put into place on the world stage to have this triggering event, to then have a state of exception where a new strongman, a new regime comes into play and rolls our thoughts and ideas into a new order of being. So Giorgio Gammon, the critical analysis of democracy and its authority to totalitarianism within the context of biopolitics. That's essentially the Kabbalah project of creating this new order that's put into modern institutions. It's the eugenics project that's put into modern institutions. That's where you get into Foucault and people like Agamben that say that through the conditioning of media, of school, we're traditioned to think in order to achieve the goals of this, techno-utopia, of this new Mashiach, the order of the new Mashiach. In the context of modern democracy, the relationship of totalitarianism within the context of biopolitics and the empire of spectacle that we are chained to. He argues that contemporary democracy has become decadent, and has gradually aligned itself with the totalitarian states, blurring the boundaries between them. And that's what I'm saying. The world powers, our world leaders, if you can cite one that hasn't sold out to this program, anybody that's a national decision maker, it's pretty much total. It's a total. It's in totality. Everybody is down on the world stage with the agenda. Agamben points to a fundamental paradox at the heart of modern democracy. He suggests that the emphasis on the value of life, which has become primarily concerned with politics, has led to the erosion of other values and convergence between democracy and its supposed enemies. That's a complicated, but he's saying the eugenics regime controls us through supposedly taking care of our bodies. That's what 5 years ago was about. Save grandma, put this operating platform inside you so you don't get X, Y, and Z. So that it's foot in the door for controlling your behavior. So he's saying there's this, it should be obvious, the distinction between Saint Maximilian Kolbe and the Khazarian Mafia. But in this age of deception, our categories of thought get moved around. And he argues that the totalitarian regimes of Nazism and fascism elevated decisionalism to bare life. Okay, so decisionalism is that moment during a triggering event when everybody is trying to figure out what's going on, because they're going to assume everything happened it's just all organic. It's an accident. They're not going to see an agenda at play. Decisionalism, whoever can rise above and say, do what I say, they're going to be the new sovereign. The people, another way of saying this, it's the people through will to power and standing beyond good and evil. The people that are going to say, follow me in this new direction, they're going to be your new masters. The people that rise up. That's what state of exception is. Under the conditions of uncertainty, that figure that rises, probably the strong man that was prearranged, once we give our consent, they've got us, right? That energy, they in fact are the new sovereign. Doesn't matter if we voted for them. It's like democracy, tacit consent. If we're following them, we've been given our consent. According to Agamben, the concept of decisionalism, where the power to make life and death decisions is concentrated and centered is the center of a new political paradigm. He suggests that there is a continuity or interconnectedness between mass democracies and totalitarianism. Democracies, the way they can easily be steered and guided, and we can say other examples of them, can be steered into totalitarianism. The concentration camp serves as the hidden paradigm of political power operating right now within this empire of spectacle. In other words, there's a logic to contemporary politics today. What's going on in the world stage, what's going on in the national level. It's moving toward the acceptance of Noahide, where somebody can make and break you those decisions about life or death that will be the new sovereign. I feel like I'm getting a little bit too philosophical, so I'll move on at this point as we're talking about, he goes into, after this, we're going to Great Reset, the Open Conspiracy. We're talking about Yuval Harari, the religion of Dadaism, which is really just an arm of the synagogue, surveillance under the skin. It's the, it's the technological singularity. So let's move on a little bit here. So what I'm arguing now is the world's going to be pushed into a triggering event, a state of exception, where a new leader, and the new leader is going to be the decider. He's going to define a new norm. If the people follow the new sovereign, it will be established. If you say part of the new norm is reject Jesus Christ or reject his Trinitarian nature or reject a bodily resurrection, or, there has to be two covenants, or really only the old covenant is valid, so you have to get on the new, whatever changes are made, once you follow him, you are, it's established, right? At one point, we'll talk, it's the mark of the beast kind of territory that, you're going to probably have to take a mark at some point. So understanding, because a lot of this will happen surreptitiously, the sovereign thus defines reality, creates an egregore. I cannot define that fully, but I'll do a little bit right now. The sovereign decides the friends and foes. So from this triggering event, the state of exception, the confusion, a rise of a strong arm or new sovereign with new rules, we can always tell that in history because new friends and enemies will be established. Okay, and those three things then create the new world order. Okay, and what I want to do right now is I want to move over to egregore, and I want to talk about that for a moment, because this is what we want to be prepared to avoid. So this was an article by Mako a couple weeks ago, and what I want to stand firm from. So Singularity came out 7 years and 3 months ago, and this came out 1 year and 2 months ago. Both of my books aimed to systematically describe a concept of the egregore. So I wanted to be uniquely the only one that had a systematic. It's an esoteric concept, and I want to explain how it worked. I want to go to Macau for a minute. He came up with his own insight from a couple weeks ago. I like a couple insights that he has, but I have a full-blown systematic scheme for understanding this. And indeed, in this book, a whole chapter is devoted to it. It's a thread throughout, but there's a whole chapter devoted for it called The Demonic in Politics, because an egregore has a demonic ontology, the memetics that control you. And in short, I have a Catholic definition. And the Catholic definition is, once you're inside the Catholic social order, you cannot be subjected to this. It's pure being, the Catholic social order. Once you're outside of it, you're increasingly subjected to these new paradigms of how the world works, starting with Martin Luther all the way down to anything. So once we're in the fullness of the reality that is the Catholic Church traditionally understood, you can't have an egregore. That's what before I show Mako's kind of concept of egregore. But Mako says right here, does the egregore explain the mysterious affinity shared by Um, make sure I got it up here. Sorry, y'all. I want to be able for you to read some of this because this stuff is not going to fly. So you have to kind of, I'm going to be a little. So the Illuminati, satanic, as they are their own God or egregore. This is close enough to how I define it. Again, my definition is ultimately uniquely Catholic. The only one in the universe that's given a uniquely Catholic. When I wrote Sing Through the Singularity 5 years ago, this was nobody had ever heard of it. Nobody had ever mentioned it. I found it under the deepest floorboards of esoteric writing. It has been bounced around in the last 5 years. And now, he's putting it out there with his large circulation. So it's an idea here connected to Lucifer, the master meme. See how we know this term meme, or I talk about memetics, these paradigms that have this power over us. I just want to make sure this is up here. The master meme, the people who usurp the role of God. That's what's going to happen, I'm arguing, during a state of exception. A new paradigm, a new order will be prepared. And once you get in if you accept, if you acquiesce, if you deny God, deny the church, when you're subjected to this new one, there will be a mimetic demonic power over your mind with this paradigm. So that's why I'm preparing people in advance. But I like this phrase here. He's talking to this one believer and she wore a star. And basically it's like this. She answered, he said, she believes in a God of the Jays who serves the Jays rather than being served by them. So he's calling this term is Lucifer. It's their elite people have made him the master of the universe. I'm not going to go into the concept that much more, but here is the difference. When we talk about this sleight of hand that these Judaizers like to say, this word Judeo-Christian, like it's just slightly different kind of thing. In Christianity, God is all being. So we connect to God through his being. If we're good, if we're fair, if we're just, we take on those qualities by participating in the fullness of God's perfect being, perfect justice, and so forth. That's Christianity. This God has no essence. Our definition of a Christian God and our idea of the 10 commandments is we serve God. We obey the commandments. In this world order that's coming, they worship, this is from the Zohar, the Mishnah, the Kabbalah, tied to the Noahides and Maimonides. This is one project moving through time. It's a God that Albert Pike would describe as a God of forces. That's what they worship. It serves them. Big difference, right? So it's a God of this world. It's a God of the prince of the air. That's the egregore, essentially. It's the same God over the spectacle that wants us to pull away from the first commandment, loving God with all our heart, loving our neighbors as ourselves. Everything follows from that. If we're not perfectly engaged, we open ourselves up to idols of this world. Okay, I'm going to cruise on here. So again, there are people in place behind many administrations, and some, like over here, have one front and center assigned to him. All these people moving the world by any means necessary toward this direction. And now, at the risk of, sounding like a jerk, I think people have to be clear about what we've just described. Because if you're still kind of doing, well, at least we're not, men are not trying to use the women's bathroom and so forth. If you can't see what's being set up on the world stage, or if you deny it because it's inconvenient, you will become attached to this great deception. And the Mar-a-Lago piece was just a line in the sand down there. Now these people that call themselves trad, that should be protecting the church traditionally understood, are instead embracing embracing this. They don't see it. Well, because he doesn't say he's a communist. No, because they lie. And once you start, just start counting it over and over and over and over. In the first week of office, what am I going to put in? Stargate. That's the other piece of it. Anti-Semitic legislation. In the first week, he's exposing it all to you. This is the direction of things. The new order that they want out of the Club of Rome, out of the technocracy plan of the 10 kingdoms that involves Greenland. That's what this is all about. Did anybody vote for this? Did anybody, hey, you know what? I really think the Gulf of Mexico should be changed. I really think we should put massive trade wars against China and Mexico and see, just play with fire and see what comes of it. And just trust that in years to come, everything will be okay. This is insanity. It's by design, orchestrated chaos to move us into a state of exception. Be prepared. So the MAGA thing, I know it's, this is a tough part with a lot of people, but that's how this whole thing's been set up. That's the hook. And that's the one thing I believe we have to get over to get right. And if you can't see as a Catholic right now, if you can't call out somebody like this is the ultimate Trumpster. I played a video a few weeks back where he brags, we're Christian, we're Catholic Zionists. I've got the trads. If you're a trad and you're down with that, if you're one and the same as an evangelical, build the third temple kind of person, yeah, you can call it out and say we're not doing that. But by association, by linking your mind, body, and spirit to this messianism and not saying, Bannon, you're full of it. Look at that picture, whether it's him or Kennedy trolling around with this guy. Is quite something. Mr. Shmuley over there, and I don't want to go into, being part owner in his daughter's sex toy operation, but you can, well, at least he doesn't own Pornhub, so it's not that bad. It could be worse. Lesser of two evils. We got to pull away from this. And these people are attached to the Khazarian Mafia. And it brings us back to the preparation for the state of exception and preparing our minds, understanding what they're up to, the true power that they have had for centuries now, but especially over the last 150 years, the ability to create a new world order in 1944, and now another one that's impending. Where is our consciousness? And if you don't literally want to be on board with the organization, I would just plead with you that you get your mind on the side of Saint Kolbe. And again, the pictures in your head. I'll be honest, I don't understand how people don't get it. I just don't. But I keep moving forward. I don't. What else do you need to see? He's worshiping, with the mafia, this person that his goal was what we just read, the extermination of Christianity and the building of the Mashiach, Antichrist kingdom. How much clearer do you need to be? And he's always got son-in-law who is a straight up Shabbat Lubavitcher, straight up down with the agenda, the real estate investment over in Gaza, the two of them to make that agenda happen. Pictures in our heads. And we went, if you want to go back, it's 7 years ago. It's called The Head of the Snake. There's 3 episodes where I kind of do a visual breakdown of the power, and I connect it back to the trading systems and the cartels and the Bank of International Settlement and the new, birthing the modern world system, that we mentioned, IMF and so on. So these people, picture alone, looks like they influence a significant, they have significant influence. We did another show on locals last week where we read from another rare person that's talking about the agenda and the influence. And he said these heads of state, they don't roll out the red carpet for really anybody else but this group of gangsters when they come to town. And they look, oh, well, I'll try not to say pardon my French. It looks like they're going to crap their pants while they're having pictures taken. I mean, these guys, they look like they're frankly scared of these guys in most of these photographs. And they brag, of course, we still have the dialectic, Putin, the good guy. I reject that, have rejected that all along. The Shabads, the oligarchs, I can show tape after tape of them bragging that Russia's our baby, that they're using the dialectic in the Ukraine to do the same project extension of Gaza. If this video flies, I'll be amazed. So the pictures in our head. I opened up the video, the sound didn't work, of this person that's been condemned by a number of international courts and humanitarian institutions being treated like a hero. That's where America's at. That's where most of the world leaders are at. And in an age when most people are going to be deceived, you'd probably want to be in a minority group, I'm suggesting. And again, I don't want to take up too much time. If you Wikipedia, scripture that's anti-Semitic, I focused in on this on my article about St. John Chrysostom. All of those things describe the enmity between the church and the synagogue, the deicide, the curse of the serpent, the essential. I mean, what makes Christianity from sacred scripture is on the chopping block to be gutted, and there is no pushback. That's where we are as Christians. That's where we are as Catholics. There's, the people are standing up, are trying to be on the platform and pussyfooting around here with the right words. So that's where we're at. There is no pushback. This is the threat. If this doesn't threaten you with people being hauled off for having an opinion, which is happening. This is state of exception kind of stuff. If there's no pushback right now, well, they came for the Palestinian. I look the other way. The war is against Amalek. Amalek is them. It's Lebanon. It's Syria, who they've captured. It's the West. It's Christendom. It's America. If you don't see the direction of things, and not only are you not defending it, but you're going along with it. And I'll show you an example of people that are going along with it. So there you got it. The son-in-law right there. In the process of making all this illegal, what you can say, what you cannot say. The movements going on, Christ is King, has been hijacked by crazy people that call out the agenda. This is the direction of things. Is this the team you want to be on? Do you want to be on Team Mar-a-Lago? Here's another example. We've done several shows. We'll continue it. A group called the Philos Project. Here's somebody, a Catholic journalist, saying that people that call out the agenda, we're not even really Catholic, we're haters. And the people that are down, the people that aren't going to mention the beheading over there in Syria, what's going on in Gaza, they're not going to talk about it. But they will say the biggest danger is people saying Christ is King, or the people that have hijacked that term, Christ is King. That's the biggest danger in the world today. People saying Christ the King. Have you figured out that we're an upside down world yet? So what I'm doing here is just trying to make this dichotomy between the two worlds and how their techniques of grabbing on to your consciousness. So yes, extremists, J haters, social media, they're saying in this article that we read from yesterday, I did this with Catholic State on Locals. They're saying that we have all the power. We can whip people up with our lies and our sensationalism and get an audience, where they're just struggling. Never mind the fact that the owners and controllers of international financial capital have all their money behind these groups, and they're popping in, and their regular methods of the synagogue, of the Khazarian Mafia, of the Lubovichers is the age-old method of the serpent. It's infiltration, it's deception, it's controlling the narratives. They're trying to call white black and black white, trying to call people that defend the church bad people, and the biggest problem in the world. You can barely get this conversation across open channels. So this is upside down world. This is where we're asked, and I'm just asking Catholics in particular, traditional in particular, but any Catholics, to kind of just see the lay of the land here and see what's happening and see the direction of things. And so Christians, I love you. I'm not a Christian, but go out and vote. And everybody's moving the world up for the right event at the right time. And we're, again, do we have Mar-a-Lago on our brains, or are we standing firm with our commitment to the church, to our Blessed Mother, to St. Maximilian Kolbe? Because what's going on over there, if you're trapped in this fake event, this messianism, you'll also be down with what's going on in the bigger Israeli program being set up over there. It's population control, real estate grab, and we see it going on all over. And we see, I'll just say, I was trapped in a location yesterday where there's a TV. I couldn't get away. And Fox News was playing with this guy, JD, talking. I mean, just how people can't you tell if someone's lying? And he's saying, well, we got to annex Greenland. We got to, because Denmark, they just haven't been doing their job. So we're going to, this should bring back other times in history. And you wonder, how did other people get captured by the energy, by the thoughts in different times? How did it happen? And the synagogue uses the same modus operandi. And so we see it again. So it's happening right in front of our faces. Did you vote for this? Do you want this? Security? And so there's a larger agenda going on there. And the only way any of this matches up, if you think about the ultimate agenda going on over there. And obviously, if you're slated, if the opportunity and the next event comes along, I would avoid having the operation put the operating platform put into you, or boosting on it. Bear in mind, all of the people, whenever you get everybody down with the same thing, a red flag should be going off in anybody's mind. And so whether we got all the people externalizing the message, lifetime connection to military intelligence, MI6, Mossad, to make a complete, as Georgian Ogamban said, totality. It's happening within the context of democracy. We're going along with it. We didn't really vote for these policies, but we're going along with it. That makes them sovereign at this time. And if we're going along with this Kabbalistic project, and we're prepared to unite our minds, bodies, and souls into this larger operating platform, this kind of this Tower of Babel 2.0, the Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Everything, which is the plan. They put it out there. He told everybody with his tech bros that came in, this is what we're up to. We're going to cure cancer. And again, I don't know if you've heard of this, but people lie. So yeah, that's coming. Again, if people continue to see this and just not calling it out, this is externalized by them, allowed by God. This is a deciding time. Like, which side do you want to be on? Like, this isn't, you don't have to know Kabbalah. You don't have to go deep into esoterics or know about the Negregor to have some sense about, that seems wrong. If anybody else were doing it, it would be called wrong. And again, it starts there and goes to the entire world. That's the launching pad for the new order of things. And, we got actors in place. And again, not many, they've already decided. The Protestants or evangelicals, they've already figured it out. I think the window's going to close pretty soon. Not everybody that's an evangelical is down with it. Some people like Chuck Baldwin speak loudly about it. It's like, wake up, wake up. But we got a guy in place in a critical decision making that is as nutty as any of the other mafioso figures. We got a mouthpiece in place that will say anything necessary to pacify or indeed to capture the minds of people. And it's there. They want the consciousness of the world to get along. They need the metaphysical battery power of your mind working for their agenda. If you're not working for it, you will need to be martyred. And it's important to say, just to point out, this is how they speak about the Masons, the people that are working for them, that once their time is done, those PIGs, those non-Js, they will become Amalek too. So I think it should be clear, if you're still with me after all this time, the deep state has never been the Democrats or some kind of wokester, as Steve Bannon suggests, but it is the synagogue. And the synagogue has an agenda, and we've already described that. So the final phase is, again, simply put, whether we call these people Lubavitchers, Doomsday Cult, Khazarian Mafia, all entities of the synagogue. Zionism was a creation to bring about this New World Order, but it too will be dissolved. It's part of the plan. But ultimately, what will remain until the end of time in their plans would be Noahide. So I ask people to ultimately pick a side, and I believe that it's time to truly get away from a defensive posture and spread the gospel to all people that have not accepted the gospel. And I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you all for joining me today. This has been Dr. Deep State.